In the last podcast, we had a conversation about what is a brand. In this episode, we're going to dig into brand strategy. And just to quickly touch on strategy, because it is a word that's used quite often, but strategy is a plan of action to achieve a long-term aim. So this week we're going to dive further into brand strategy, and I guess, MC, what is brand strategy?
Well, I think, you've identified a good place to start there. I mean, I see it basically as just getting it down on paper at a very broad level, Like any strategy, it's something that you can carry around in your head or think that everybody is on the same page, but it's often only when you pull it out of your brain and put it down on paper, or metaphorical paper anyway, that you get a real clear idea and everyone gets on the same page. And so it's creating that strong foundation and plan to rally around for your brand.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the things that we definitely see is that it overlaps a lot with your business strategy and your business plan as well. It's something that's especially true when we look at brands because, we come from a bit of a commercial background ourselves, and so we're used to diving into the business side of things. But we bring, I guess, that commercial and brand strategy together. So really, at the end of the day, it's just about having that clear plan and something that will help you break decision deadlocks, when there's something else that helps you highlight what's really important.
Yeah, I mean, and business strategy and brand strategy, there is such an overlap between the two of them.
Yeah.
I mean, can you distinguish the difference between the two nowadays?
Yeah, I think that there's probably a few things that sort of fall in one or the other, certainly anything that's probably more visual is more aligned to your brand strategy. And there might be some things that the finance department cares about in the business plan that's, not as related to your brand. But I guess as we talked about last time, we really see that brand tentacles reach to practically every part of the business. So it's going to make sense that your brand strategy and your business strategy overlap.
Would you say brand strategy focuses more on the customer as opposed to, say, the business model? Like, is it more pertinent to the company's customer, and that's where brand strategy plays a role?
Yeah, hopefully in a good business plan, you're definitely taking the customer into account as well. But yeah, to your point, it definitely something that should really shape your brand strategy. It shouldn't just be for you. It should be about, how you want to create those thoughts and feelings for your customer.
Now, strategy is something in our own practice, in our own studio, that we kind of stumbled across, and it forms the bedrock of what we do each and every day now. But it was something that we kind of stumbled in because we always did it just as part of our deep dive process that we did with customers, but we never realized that we were actually doing strategy in those first couple of years.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a good sort of hark back to the start, isn't it, where it's like you can sort of almost have a strategy by accident just by doing the work, and it's the same in business as it is with your brand. Like if you just do the work, you're kind of implementing these decisions on the fly and making them up as you go. But I guess that's the thing that we've really learned is that works a lot of the time, and you're probably going more off gut instinct. So if you've got good instincts, that can work out fine. But it's actually separating those decisions and pillars out first, that we've now noticed makes such a big difference. Whether it's creating consistency or making decisions, down the track, to have that separate strategy that you've actually articulated and agreed upon, it just then makes all that other work so much easier and meaningful because it's harking back to that strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm a gut feel kind of person. I'll make it up as a role. Yeah. I mean, whereas you're more of a typical strategy, like planning, analyzing kind of guy. I mean, what strategy does, I think, the more that I've come to learn about strategy and realize its importance, is it de-risks the path ahead. And I think that is probably a critical component of strategy is a risk mitigation strategy, but it also allows you to step back and and get out of the day to day and making decisions from a gut feel point of view.
Yeah.
And kind of looking at it in a more holistic way, in isolation, in the quietness as well too, where you can really analyze things properly.
Yeah. And I think we've seen this a lot already with clients and stuff as well. It just changes the conversation when you're working through, any particular problem or bit of work, because, everyone starts talking about, well, what's the strategy, or how does this fit with our strategy, and you start to see everybody really buy into those things, and because they've also had a hand in creating it as well, then they start to become quite passionate about it, and, really want to defend those sort of strategic values or pillars. And then they're just more meaningful conversations. It's not, well, I like that piece of work because I like the color blue. It's, all about how does this, thing that we're trying to do relate back to the strategy that we set out in the first place.
Yeah, so, if we were to kind of break apart strategy, which is what we love to do, is but break things apart to put them back together again.
Yeah.
How would you kind of break out a brand strategy? What are the combinations that pull it all together?
The first thing really always for us is a level of understanding. We want to dive deep and really understand the business. As we talked about before with that overlap between business strategy and brand strategy, I think either of those things only really work with a deep level of understanding. The people who are involved, what are they trying to do? This is obviously where the why and the passion, comes into it. It's obviously a lot of times the place that you really want to start is, what is the reason that this brand exists, and, the people behind it get out of bed every day to do what they do, that cornerstone.
On that point, if you're a small business person, or you're the founder of a company, or you're a startup with a big idea, like that purpose and mission is typically more evident, and maybe a little easier to articulate. But what if you're a brand manager and you come into a business that's been established for maybe 5, 10, 15 years, how does that whole purpose and mission piece play into that person's role?
Yeah, it's still vitally important. I think that it then just becomes the job of that person, if it's not already clearly articulated, to do the digging and find that nugget of gold. You'd hope, and we often see that the most successful brands have always started from that kind of idealistic passion kind of place. Even if they do get bigger and have multiple tiers of brand managers, you'd hope that does already exist. But if it's not, then I'd say that really it's about that person going out and talking to everyone involved in the business, from the bottom to the top, and what drives them, and I guess try and string together the commonalities of that, and how that might then manifest itself into the brand that you take out to the world.
Yeah, my personal opinion on this is that it's harder to reverse in a mission. It's not impossible, but it can happen, but it needs a careful kind of curated plan to come together. It needs strategy for that to come together. But to reverse in a mission becomes more difficult the longer the brand is established for, and say new people are at the helm. But I think equally on the other side of the ledger, it's really critical that when you're starting out a brand, or your brand is in its early infancy, in its early stages, that the mission and the values and the why are kind of locked down nice and early.
Yeah, exactly. I think you can, especially if it's a new brand, you can sort of get caught up in a lot of other decisions and get pretty far down the road without realizing that, you haven't kind of imbued that into everything that you do. So, as you say, having that strategy, the sooner the better. Yeah.
Okay. What's some of the other things that come together to create a strategy?
Yeah, so there's plenty else to understand about the business, beyond just the why. So, vision is something we talk about a lot. Like, where do you see the brand going in 5 to 10 years, and how will you grow to get there? When we create a brand, we want it to be long lasting. We set out with that goal, and a lot of people that we work with have the same sort of thing, but they haven't necessarily sat down and mapped out what that vision looks like. So we talk a lot about that. What does the brand and the company and the people value? What are their personality traits, both from a real human point of view, but then how that might translate into the brand itself. We certainly see brands with strong personalities, again, winning out a lot of times.
Why is the personality of the founders or the people behind the company important in the way that you then communicate and message to the market? Like, why?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this a bit last week in terms of authenticity being, such a key component of a good brand. We find that if you try and be something you're not, it's going to fall apart pretty quickly. It's a lot stronger and a lot easier and more meaningful if you're really just reflecting, both the combination of that person and their personality and their passion. Those two things coming together. Yeah. And a lot of times that ties into the next one, which is uniqueness. What makes this brand unique and how they'll, I guess, win in their market. Certainly having a unique personality and passion goes a long way to that. We also look a lot at the understanding the market that the brand operates in, so who are their competitors, if there are any, how are people actually evaluating, one brand against the other, because it's not always the things that you would think about. I mean, we were just talking yesterday about how product, seems like a good differentiator, but it's not always, something that a customer can even tell the difference on. So, looking at how people actually evaluate competitors, not just who they are, and looking at, who are the audiences, the people that you serve. And this it isn't necessarily just your customers. Obviously, that's a massive component of it. But there's other audiences, that may be looking at your brand and that you serve in a different way that you need to consider.
And like, who would be an example of that? Like, for example, like your team, your staff?
Your staff, the media, if you're trying to appeal, to certain parts of the media and get exposure. Yep. Any sort of stakeholders really that have a say or an interest in your business, can form an audience for your brand.
And so once you've got some of those core elements of strategy, what do you do with that?
So this is where I guess we sort of see those things being clearly articulated ends up becoming the playbook for the brand. It's the guide that is going to influence all the different decisions that you have to make going forward. And we see this a lot where, people are struggling to make a decision, around a bit of work or something that we're collaborating with them on. And even if it's then something that they maybe feel a little bit uncomfortable with at first, we were able to refer back to that strategy and say, well, no, this is what we agreed. These are the goals and the vision that we set out. Does it align with that? So forget a bit about your personal preference and think about whether it aligns to the strategy. And you can sort of often see the light bulb go off in their brain that, oh yeah, that is what we said we wanted to do with this brand. So let's embrace that and go forward. So it ensures that all that work that we do, whether it's design, content, web development, all that sort of stuff, is really aligned to those specific needs of the business and the audience.
Yeah, I mean, we often talk about framework and how a brand framework is so important for how your brand evolves over time, because the framework shouldn't be rigid, but it should give you a sense of the rules and the box in which you play in. But I guess, thinking about how do you actually use strategy once you've gone through that process of identifying what your brand strategy is, and then you put it into a playbook. But then what do you do in terms of actually using that on a practical day-to-day level?
Yeah, I mean, for us, I guess, we always see the danger of making a strategy and then just putting it in a drawer and, forgetting about it. I think everyone's done that with a business plan or two. So certainly in our work, I guess we sort of trot it out with every bit of work that we do. So every time we're kicking off a new project or a bit of work, we revisit the strategy and revisit that with the team to make sure that it's that it's front of mind. And I think that's one of the things that having a good strategy really does, is it keeps that vision of where you want to go like constantly on your mind. It's so you get, I guess, less caught up in the day-to-day or that next immediate decision that you just want to go away. It keeps those goals front of mind, so that everything you're doing is geared towards that. So yeah, we I guess revisit it every bit of new work that we do, but I think the value of creating that brand strategy lives beyond just the any design project or web project or anything like that we might be involved on. I guess what we would really see the true value that creates is that it's a reference tool for the business to make other decisions. Even like last week we talked about hiring or choosing where your office might be. You can refer back to your brand strategy and see if those decisions align, at any point. I think the key there is that when you're developing it, is if everybody that is a key stakeholder in the team on the client side is involved and really feels like ownership of those decisions and making that strategy, then the chances of them remembering to pull it out or remembering to reference it all the time is so much higher.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a big one. Okay, and anything else that we want to cover in terms of how brand strategy gets used?
No, I think that's pretty good.
I mean, talking about practical examples of strategy being deployed, the one that comes to mind for me is Patagonia.
Yeah,
I've always been a bit of a Patagonia fanboy. For my mind, they're very clear about their purpose, and they always have been right from the get-go, like right back to, I think it was like in the mid 80s when Patagonia was properly founded, and it was always around this idea that they would create the best products, but also that they would cause no harm in creating those products. And then the third aspect of it was that there was this environmental activism aspect to their brand.
Sure.
And that is still true today. Like, that is still the framework in which they operate.
Yeah.
And it's simple because there's only those three things, really. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of other parts of their strategy.
Of course. Yeah.
But those three things have been the enduring things in their brand strategy that have flowed from those very early days until modern times. And I think it's been so critical. I mean, I guess that's an example of a brand that we probably all know, but kind of more locally in terms of some of the work that we do. I mean, can you give me an example of where brand strategy is kind of manifested in some of the stuff that we do?
Yeah, I mean, one of the projects that Ruben's still working on at the moment, I think, is a great example where it's really made such a big difference. So we've been collaborating with actually 4 different services firms that are merging together, and the funny thing is that they've actually been trying to sort this stuff out for a long time, coming up with a combined name for the new merger, branding, what it should look like, how they even frame, and talk about their services. And it's only really by going through a separate strategy process and having some external eyes look at it, which, is another facet that often flushes this stuff out, that they've actually been able to agree on a lot of this stuff, and actually ultimately quite easily make some of these decisions, because we've actually gone through that strategy part. We help them identify, what are their core values. They sort of had separate values as separate businesses, but by just sort of working through it and getting on the same page, they now have a really strong set of values that they all can get behind. We identified a really clear and strong personality that they wanted to go after. So all the design work has been, really framed around that. And again, has probably pushed their comfort zone a bit. But we were able to sort of guide them through that by, coming back and saying, well, no, this is the sort of challenger brand that you wanted to be. And so, you need to reflect that in all the work that we do. So yeah, for them, it's been this, I guess, almost this big unlocking and an ability to move forward, you know, after a long time of sort of struggling to make decisions and take action. So I think strategy has been huge for them.
Yeah, I mean, and strategy is definitely a piece that oftentimes gets overlooked as you're a small business or you're a single founder. But when you find yourself in a situation where there is multiple founders with multiple ideas, values, and missions, it becomes even more critical, I think.
For sure. Yep.
Okay, and then I guess thinking about some takeaways for anyone listening. I mean, what is the ask this week of our audience?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this, and we thought that, you know, starting with that why, or that passion of what you're actually in business for is something really good to revisit, you know, even if you probably have identified it, you know, months or years ago when you started, actually revisiting that. And so we thought it'd be a good idea, you know, this week, if you actually got out the pen and paper and wrote down your why statement, you know, even if it's both for you personally and then for your business as well. And then just sort of reflect for a bit and think about, you know, is that the same thing that your business partners, is that their same why? You know, do your team members know and understand that? Is it something really that you're living? And if not, you know, can you see the things that you'd need to change, you know, to actually start living your why?
Okay, awesome. Sounds good. All right, well, it was awesome to talk strategy with you, MC.
Cheers, Dave.
Thank you.
No worries.